History often turns on moments of hesitation. One delayed order, one missed opportunity, and the fate of empires shifts forever. Now imagine a world where the last Tsar of Russia, often mocked as indecisive and unlucky, chose not passivity, but purpose. What if Nicholas II, scarred by humiliation and driven by fear of decline, had acted before it was too late? What if the empire of the Romanovs had been reborn in steel and fire, not buried beneath the red tide of revolution? At the dawn of the 20th century, Russia and Japan were locked in a tense dance for dominance over Korea and Manchuria. That rivalry erupted into the Russo-Japanese War, and in our reality, Japan stunned the world by crushing a European empire. It was the first time an Asian power defeated the West in modern warfare, sending shockwaves through colonial empires everywhere. The loss humiliated Russia, shattered its prestige, and pushed the country into the revolution of 1905. The Tsar, Nicholas II, bore the blame. His empire staggered into chaos until he was forced to sign the 1906 Constitution, a desperate attempt to preserve order. Britain struck another blow with the 1907 Anglo-Russian Convention, halting Russia's ambitions in Central Asia. Meanwhile, the Ottoman Empire was crumbling under nationalist pressure, and the Balkans were spiraling beyond Russia's control. By the time the First World War began, the empire was already brittle, and within 3 years, Nicholas was gone, overthrown in the February Revolution of 1917. His abdication was followed by civil war, his family's execution in 1918, and Lenin's grim creation of the Soviet Union. But history didn't have to unfold that way. In this alternate timeline, Nicholas II, haunted by Japan's rapid rise and desperate to prove Russia's strength, decides to act early. His turning point comes after the Boxer Rebellion of 1900, when his finance minister, Sergei Witta, and military leaders warn him that Russia's Far Eastern position is dangerously exposed. Instead of dithering, Nicholas orders the immediate completion of the Trans-Siberian Railway, a project that, in our timeline, was still unfinished by 1904. Here, the railway is fully operational by 1902, closing the critical gap near Lake Baikal. This single act changes everything. Now, Russian troops and supplies can travel from Moscow to Vladivostok in just 15 to 20 days instead of 40, granting the empire a decisive logistical edge over Japan, which still relies on long, vulnerable sea routes. The West takes notice. Britain and France grow uneasy, sensing that Russian ambitions in Asia might finally be within reach. At the same time, between 1899 and 1903, Nicholas authorizes sweeping military reforms. Inspired by the German army, General Alexei Kuropatkin pushes for modernization, rapid-fire artillery, mass-produced machine guns, and retrained Siberian corps drilled in modern tactics rather than outdated Crimean-era doctrines. By 1903, Russia has 150,000 well-equipped soldiers stationed in the Far East, with 50,000 more in reserve near Harbin and over 300 field guns guarding the fortress of Port Arthur. The Tsar doesn't stop there. Under the guidance of Admiral Yevgeny Alexeyev and the brilliant strategist Stepan Makarov, Russia invests heavily in its Pacific fleet. 2 new battleships from the Baltic are relocated to Port Arthur by 1902, joined by minesweepers and torpedo boats. Makarov, appointed 3 years earlier than in real history, transforms the Navy's readiness, enforcing rigorous drills, coastal fortifications, and mine clearance operations around Port Arthur that would later save countless lives. Gone is the hesitant Nicholas, who once trusted fate more than foresight. In his place stands a ruler who delegates to men of vision, wit, Kuropatkin, Makarov, while introducing limited domestic reforms to cool revolutionary anger at home. By early 1904, tensions boil over. Japan, armed with its 1902 alliance with Britain, demands Russia withdraw from Korean affairs. Negotiations collapse. On February 8, 1904, Japan launches a surprise attack on Port Arthur, but this time Russia is ready. Though the battleships Tsarevich and Redvizin and the cruiser Pallada suffer damage, the reinforced Pacific Fleet quickly regroups. Makarov retaliates on February 9th with the battleships Petropavlovsk and Pobeda supported by torpedo boats. In the ensuing clash, the Japanese destroyer Akatsuki sinks and the cruiser Asama is crippled. Admiral Togo retreats, conceding control of the Yellow Sea to the Russians. For the first time, the rising sun is forced to dim. Japan, undeterred, shifts focus to the land campaign. By late February, General Kuroki Tamura lands near Incheon, seizing Seoul and pushing toward the Yalu River by May. But Kuropatkin is waiting. 60,000 Russians, entrenched with artillery and machine guns, unleash devastating fire as Japanese troops cross the river. On May 2nd, a Japanese flanking maneuver collapses under a fierce counterattack by Siberian Cossacks. By May 3rd, the Japanese army is in retreat, leaving 10,000 dead. Russian losses? Barely 200. For the first time in modern history, Japan's army has been decisively beaten, and the shock reverberates across the globe. Port Arthur remains unbroken, and Russia's hold on northern Manchuria stands firm. Then comes the Great Clash at Sea, the Battle of the Yellow Sea on August 10, 1904. Makarov leads 8 battleships, 4 cruisers, and 14 destroyers against Togo's smaller fleet. Russian gunnery, enhanced by German-inspired targeting systems, strikes accurately at 8-mile range, crippling Mikasa and sinking Iwate. Togo retreats once again. Russia loses only 1 destroyer, and Port Arthur's supply lines stay open. By early 1905, with 350,000 troops now arriving through the Trans-Siberian Railway, Russia finally launches its full-scale counteroffensive. Japan, with 270,000 men, exhausted and undersupplied, faces a campaign it cannot win. For the first time, the question changes. Not how long can Russia hold out, but how far can it go? A daring Japanese flanking attack near the Yalu ended in disaster, encircled and crushed by Kuropatkin's disciplined forces. Within days, Japanese casualties soared past 30,000. On March 10th, the Russian general seized his moment. Launching a massive counteroffensive, he surrounded the Japanese Second Army in a brutal, week-long struggle that ended with 15,000 prisoners and a shattered enemy retreating south under General Oyama's desperate command. For the first time in modern memory, the proud Japanese army, the same that once stunned the world at Port Arthur, was on the run. Kuropatkin pressed the advantage, driving the exhausted enemy toward the Korean frontier. Then, in May, the world witnessed an event that would define this alternate century. Admiral Rojestvenski's Baltic fleet, once doomed to annihilation on its long voyage from Europe, finally arrived in the Pacific, not in confusion, but in coordination. Unlike in our history, this time, the admiral was working in lockstep with Makarov, whose reforms and intelligence network had transformed the fleet's discipline and communication. On May 27th, as Admiral Togo attempted to break through the Tsushima Strait to rescue Japan's trapped armies, fate struck differently. Russian firepower, coordinated across sea and sky, tore through Japanese lines. Mikasa and Asahi were sent to the depths. Torpedo squadrons crippled Shikishima, and destroyers fell in droves. By the end of the battle, 8 Japanese warships lay at the bottom of the sea, and 6,000 sailors were dead. Russia had lost 2 battleships and 1,200 men, a staggering price, but one that bought total control of the waves. Only 2 Japanese cruisers limped back to home ports. The sea lanes to Korea were severed, the supply lines strangled. Japan's armies were starving, their communications shattered. The empire that once dreamed of Asian hegemony now stood on the edge of ruin. Within months, the inevitable happened. Facing the specter of invasion, Japan sued for peace. On September 5, 1905, the Treaty of Portsmouth was signed, but this time, the terms were not humiliating to Russia. They were devastating for Japan. Korea was surrendered outright. Emperor Gojong was restored to his throne, but now under Russian supervision, a puppet ruler of a Russian protectorate. Manchuria was confirmed as a Russian sphere of influence, and Japan was forced to pay a colossal indemnity of 500 million yen, gutting its fragile economy. The shock was seismic. The myth of Japan's invincibility, the illusion that Asia could defy Europe, was obliterated. The Meiji regime, once seen as a beacon of modern progress, was humiliated before the world. What followed was not triumph, but chaos. The dream of modernization cracked under its own weight. Across Tokyo, Osaka, and Yokohama, protests exploded into fire. By late 1905, the capital was an open revolt, mobs torching government buildings, banners reading, "Down with the traitors," fluttering in the smoke. Over 10,000 demonstrators filled the streets. Martial law was declared. When it ended months later, more than 300 people were dead and thousands imprisoned. The Katsura cabinet fell on October 10th, replaced by a fragile administration led by Sanji Komuro. But it was too late. The indemnity had bankrupted Japan. Reparations alone equaled nearly 2 full years of national income, on top of catastrophic wartime losses of nearly 150,000 men. Rice prices doubled, peasants starved, and factories closed as foreign investors fled. By 1907, Japan defaulted on its loans. The once proud empire found itself cut off from Western credit. The ripple effects were global. In India, Vietnam, and the Philippines, anti-colonial movements that had once taken inspiration from Japan's rise faltered. The message was clear: Europe still ruled the world. Geopolitically, Japan was now alone. The Anglo-Japanese alliance, once its shield, meant nothing when Britain refused to intervene. Germany, meanwhile, openly supported Russia, with Kaiser Wilhelm II proclaiming, "It is clear to every honest man, Korea shall be Russian." Defeat hollowed out Japan's military and spirit. General Nogi Marasuke, disgraced, took his own life in ritual seppuku. The imperial army's prestige was gone. Naval modernization was halted as budgets collapsed. Moderates like Hirobumi Ito were branded cowards. Ito himself was assassinated in 1906. The Meiji government fractured, its once united vision splintering into factions of despair and defiance. Yet from this chaos, something new emerged: the voice of democracy. Intellectuals, liberals, and students demanded reform. The Diet, once ceremonial, grew bold. By 1910, Japan adopted a broader franchise and began cautious steps toward constitutional liberalism. Ironically, defeat, not victory, opened the door to parliamentary reform. Meanwhile, across the continent, St. Petersburg erupted in triumph. Church bells rang for days. Tsar Nicholas II, once derided as Nicholas the Bloody, was reborn as Nicholas the Deliverer, the man who had saved Christendom from the Asian menace. In this victorious Russia, revolution never ignites. The empire, flush with victory and indemnities, enjoys an economic miracle. Backed by the wise counsel of Sergei Witte, Nicholas issues the Imperial Renewal Edict of 1906, voluntarily expanding limited representation through a zemstvo-based assembly. It gives peasants and workers a symbolic voice without weakening the throne. The Tsar's regime begins a campaign of controlled reform, redistributing land to 5 million peasants, calming rural unrest, and funding modernization with Japanese reparations. The socialist underground, starved of grievance and momentum, collapses. The October Manifesto, the Duma, they never happen. The empire doesn't crack, it consolidates. The economic results are staggering. Russian steel production doubles to 8 million tons by 1914. The empire achieves a trade surplus for the first time in a century. Port Arthur becomes a major naval base. Vladivostok transforms into a booming export hub, linking Asia and Europe. Factories rise across Ukraine and Siberia, powered by cheap coal and steady funding from Manchurian resources. Generals Kuropatkin and Makarov are immortalized as national heroes. Military academies are renamed in their honor. The army adopts rapid-firing artillery and new machine gun systems, while the navy begins an unprecedented expansion, rivaling even Britain's Pacific presence. The Trans-Siberian Railway, vindicated as the artery of empire, expands deeper into Central Asia. By 1907, Russian locomotives thunder through Mongolia, protected by German financiers and engineers. Britain grows anxious as the Russian shadow stretches toward India and the Persian Gulf. That same year, Germany and Russia sign a formal alliance, a union of emperors. Wilhelm II hails Nicholas as the chosen defender of Europe against the Eastern tide. France, alarmed by its former allies' strength, drifts toward Britain, sealing the Entente Cordiale. Europe's balance of power fractures, not along the lines of 1914, but in ways far stranger and more volatile. Russia, dominant in Asia, rich in resources, united under its Tsar, had avoided the century of chaos that awaited it in our world. But history, as always, exacts its price. A stronger Russia meant a weaker West. And when the next Great War came, it would begin not in Sarajevo, but somewhere much further east. With Russia's triumph secured, Europe itself began to bend around its newfound power. Germany, already bound by blood and alliance to Austria-Hungary, brought its old partners back into the fold, reviving the League of the Three Emperors, a resurrected dream from the age of Bismarck. Kaiser Wilhelm II was convinced that Bismarck's earlier failure was not in vision but in execution, and that he could succeed where the Iron Chancellor had faltered. Across the Atlantic, the United States faced a changed world. Historically, America had quietly supported Japan to balance Russian influence in the Pacific. But now, with Japan humbled and the Romanovs ascendant, Washington saw opportunity rather than threat. The old warmth between the Russian and American governments, dating back to the Civil War, rekindled. American companies flooded into Manchuria, Siberia, and Korea, investing in railroads, oil, and timber. The stars and stripes fluttered alongside the double-headed eagle of the Tsar. Russia's prestige soared. The once isolated empire had become the beating heart of global politics, powerful, confident, and utterly unwilling to compromise. The Anglo-Russian Convention of 1907 never materialized. Nicholas saw no reason to appease a declining Britain. The Great Game over Central Asia continued, but now it was no contest. The British watched nervously from India as Russian influence stretched unbroken from the Baltic to the Pacific. The victory over Japan had changed everything. Where defeat once foreshadowed revolution and collapse, victory now promised dominance and rebirth. Russia's empire, renewed by faith and victory, stood as the preeminent power of Eurasia. But the Balkans were never silent for long. In 1908, the Young Turk Revolution shook the crumbling Ottoman Empire, and Austria-Hungary, sensing opportunity, prepared to formally annex Bosnia, which it had occupied since 1878. Serbia objected fiercely, dreaming of expansion into the same region. Russia, ever the self-proclaimed guardian of the Slavs, opposed Vienna's plan. Tensions soared until Germany intervened. Wilhelm convened the Balkan Accords, a diplomatic masterpiece designed to preserve the unity of the League of the Three Emperors. The compromise was elegant. Austria-Hungary would annex Bosnia officially, securing its southern frontier with 50,000 troops and a new web of fortified rail lines. In return, Serbia received generous economic privileges, access to Austro-Hungarian railways and Adriatic ports such as Trieste, a symbolic victory Nicholas could present as loyalty to the Slavic cause. Meanwhile, Serbia's hunger for conquest was redirected southward, toward the Ottoman remains in Macedonia and Albania, with vague Russo-German assurances of future support. Bulgaria's independence was recognized, winning Tsar Ferdinand his long-sought throne. Montenegro gained small border territories and Russian gold to strengthen its tiny army. Greece was appeased with Russian promises of future support in Crete and the Aegean. The Ottomans, exhausted and fractured, could do nothing. They demilitarized their borders and surrendered slices of territory to the League's control. The peace that followed was fragile, but for the first time in decades, the Balkans were under a stable, if foreign, order. By 1912, the First Balkan War erupted, but under very different circumstances. This time, the Balkan League moved with precision, guided by Russian strategy and armed with Russian weapons. Serbia and Montenegro swept through Kosovo and northern Macedonia. Bulgaria's army, supported by covert Russian engineers, besieged Adrianople. Greek forces, backed by Russian naval support, captured the Aegean Islands and pushed into Epirus. The Ottoman Empire collapsed with astonishing speed. By early 1913, the war was over, won decisively by the League. At the Treaty of Constantinople, Russian and German diplomats redrew the map of southeastern Europe. Serbia claimed Kosovo, Macedonia, and shared Albania with Montenegro and Greece. Bulgaria received Adrianople and southern Thrace. The Ottomans, stripped of European holdings, retained only Constantinople, now effectively under joint Russian-Habsburg influence. Most importantly, Russia gained unrestricted access for its Black Sea fleet through the Dardanelles, a dream of the Tsars for centuries, finally achieved. The treaty, guaranteed by Wilhelm, Nicholas, and Franz Joseph, prevented the historical chain reaction that had once plunged Europe into war. The Balkans stabilized. The League of the Three Emperors remained intact. And for the first time in modern history, the region's destiny lay not in chaos, but in order imposed from above. Then came June 28, 1914. In Sarajevo, Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated by a Serbian nationalist, Gavrilo Princip. But the world that followed this event was no longer the powder keg of our timeline. Kaiser Wilhelm urged calm. He advised Vienna to seek justice, not vengeance. Austria's ultimatum to Serbia was firm but measured. demanding that investigators from multiple powers, including Russia and Germany, oversee the inquiry. Nicholas II, confident in Russia's authority, invited both sides to St. Petersburg for a diplomatic summit. On July 12, 1914, representatives from Austria-Hungary, Serbia, Germany, Bulgaria, and Italy assembled in the Winter Palace. There, in the glittering heart of Imperial Russia, the Tsar himself brokered peace. Serbia agreed to the investigation. Russia and Germany guaranteed Serbian sovereignty and pledged to suppress extremist groups like the Black Hand across the Balkans. The Kaiser, the Tsar, and the Emperor of Austria stood united. 3 crowns, 3 nations, 1 purpose, stability. By month's end, the crisis was over. The Great War that once devoured a generation never began. When the investigation concluded, several Serbian officers, including intelligence chief Dragutin Dmitrievich, were found guilty of orchestrating the plot. They were executed, and Serbia forfeited its special economic privileges in Bosnia. But the League endured. By 1915, Europe stood beneath a trinity of emperors, Nicholas II, Wilhelm II, and Franz Joseph, the League of the Three Emperors, now reborn as a force dominating both Europe and Asia. France and Britain, isolated, strengthened their entente by bringing Italy closer, but they were no longer the masters of the world. The center of gravity had shifted east to St. Petersburg, Berlin, and Vienna. And as the bells of St. Isaac's Cathedral tolled in triumph, one thing was certain. The Romanov dynasty, once doomed to fall beneath the red tide of revolution, now stood secure, its throne gilded not by divine right, but by victory, diplomacy, and the steady hand of a Tsar who had learned, at last, to act before history acted upon him. For faith. For Tsar. For fatherland. So, what do you think? If Russia had crushed Japan and reshaped the world, could the 20th century have avoided its bloodiest wars? Would the Romanovs still rule today? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more what-if history stories that reimagine the past to change the future.